The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to John. Jesus went across the Sea of Galilee. A large crowd followed him because they saw the signs he was performing on the sick. Jesus went up on the mountain, and there he sat down with his disciples. The Jewish feast of Passover was near. When Jesus raised his eyes and saw that a large crowd was coming to him, he said to Philip, "Where can we buy enough food for them to eat?" He said this to test him because he himself knew what he was going to do. Philip answered him, 200 days' wages worth of food would not be enough for each of them to have a little. One of his disciples, Andrew, the brother of Simon Peter, said to him, "There's a boy here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish. But what good are these for so many?" Jesus said, "Have the people recline." Now there was a great deal of grass in that place, so the men reclined, about 5,000 in number. Then Jesus took the loaves, gave thanks, and distributed them to those who were reclining, and also as much as the fish as they wanted. When they had had their fill, he said to his disciples, "Gather the fragments left over, so that nothing will be wasted." So they collected them and filled 12 wicker baskets with fragments from the 5 barley loaves that had been more than they could eat. When the people saw the sign he had done, they said, "This is truly the prophet, the one who is to come into the world." Since Jesus knew that they were going to come and carry him off to make him king, he withdrew again to the mountain alone. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
The hand of the Lord feeds us. The hand of the Lord feeds us. He answers all our needs. The hand of the Lord feeds us. So is the antiphon for the responsorial psalm this morning. Hand of the Lord feeds us, cares for his people, and feeds them. We have 2 instances of that in the scriptures today. One is from the 2nd book of Kings. It has to do with Elisha, the prophet. Elisha is a very early prophet. He was born in 910 BCE, 910 years before the birth of Jesus, a long time ago. It's about 100 years after King David, so this is one of the earliest times in their history. It's a very important prophet. He was an assistant to Elijah, who was taken up to heaven in a fiery chariot, and Elisha got his garment, got his stole, and became a prophet like him. And so in the story from 2 Kings, we hear that a man has brought 20 barley loaves. Barley, a very hardy plant. Barley loaves, the bread was typically bread for the poor. It was very cheap. Barley grew every place. It really thrived in the desert environment. Wheat, on the other hand, was very expensive because it was very fragile. And only the wealthy got to have wheat. So the poor people got barley, and it was very hardy, and so it was readily available for them. And so Elisha has 100 people that he's standing in front of, and he wants to feed them. They're hungry. People in those days always were hungry. They were very poor. And so he asked his servant for the 20 barley loaves that the man had brought. The servant says, "Well, that's not going to be enough. Hardly anybody have anything. 20 barley loaves." Elisha says, "No, give me the loaves." And he feeds the people. He feeds the people, and even after they have eaten all they want, there's some left over. That's unheard of in those days. If you ended dinner and were still not hungry, you were lucky because food was scarce. but there was fragments left over. And the prophet quotes the Lord about having there be some left over. That was important. It's a sign of the abundance of God. God gives us more than we need. This is also reflected in the gospel with the feeding of the 5,000. I've said before that the first reading on a Sunday typically is the background music for the gospel. What the first reading does is give you Jewish ears, so that when you hear the story of the 5,000, you think as what the Jewish people would have thought. Many of them immediately would have thought of Elisha and this feeding of the 100 people with the loaves. And now here's Jesus. He's doing even more. He has 5,000 men. We don't know if there's women or children. The evangelist doesn't say. But Jesus sees that they're hungry, and so he goes to Philip and asks him, where can we buy food for these people? Scholars say that he went to Philip because they're very likely by Bethsaida, which was Philip's home on the northern shore of the Sea of Galilee. And Philip says, you'd have almost a year's wages and everyone would just have a bite. You couldn't get that much food. And so Jesus is maybe looking around, and here comes Andrew. Andrew's the brother of Simon Peter. And he says, we have this little boy here, and he's got 5 barley loaves. And not only that, he's got 2 fish. Oh, that's amazing. 5 barley loaves and 2 fish. The Greek word for the boy is pederon. Pederon is a little kid, not a teenager, a little kid, pederon. And what he got is osaria, which aren't big fish, they're little fish. So we now, in the scene, have this little boy and this 2 little fish and 5 barley loaves. And so Jesus tells them to have the crowd sit down. And then he takes the barley loaves and the 2 little fish, and he blesses them and distributes them. Now, that sounds familiar, because that sounds like the Last Supper, where Jesus sat with his disciples, broke the bread, blessed it, broke it, and gave it to them. This is my body. So this is John's version of the miracle of the Last Supper. He uses the miracle of feeding of the 5,000. In his gospel, there's not the institution of the Eucharist at the Last Supper. He has the washing of the feet instead. But in this chapter 6 of John's gospel, he presents this account of the feeding of the 5,000. It's a miracle of life. It's a miracle of the abundance of God. So they distribute these 5 loaves and the 2 little fish to the crowd. And a bunch comes back. 12 baskets full. I don't know how big the baskets were, but say they were big, this size. We're talking about that's a lot of food left over for people who would usually not have anything left over when they ate, because they were so hungry, and food was, again, even in this time, scarce, just at the time of Elisha. But 12 baskets come back, but the evangelist makes no mention of the fish. They must have really liked the fish because they ate all of it. Nothing came back, no fragments of fish, just the bread, just the loaves of barley. And so they bring it back, and so this is really a reflection of God's abundance as Jesus takes so little, 5 little loaves and these 2 little fish, and feeds 5,000 people, more than they need, more than they want, even more than they can eat. So that's the abundance of the Lord that really is reflected in the gift of the Eucharist, which is being anticipated here in this feeding of the 5,000. In fact, this account of the feeding of the 5,000 occurs just a little bit before Jesus preaching about life, being the bread of life discourse. That occurs just a few verses later in this gospel. And so it's an example of God's abundance, how he feeds us and takes care of us. And so we too are called as his disciples to also help people, feed them abundantly, give them more than they need, not to sort of eke out little bits of this and that, but give them a lot, even more than they need. In the second reading of Paul's letter to the Ephesians, he calls the people to be worthy of the call you've received. That is the call in baptism. We're called to be a child of God. And in doing that, reflect a character of God, and that is being humble, gentle, and patient with people. Be easy with people and be generous with them. Reach out to them, because it's how we maintain the community. It's how we nourish each other as God's people. And we come forward at communion time for the Mass and receive the body and blood of the Lord. And then we're sent forth to live out the truth that Jesus teaches us, and that we receive in the abundance of the Eucharist. We're called to go out and be abundant with others. Be generous to them. Be patient. Be humble. Don't be angry with them or be critical, but be easy with people and love them and care for them. And in that way, we reflect the generosity and abundance of God, because God gives all of us more than we need. And we're called then to accept those gifts, cherish them, use them, but then turn and share them with those around us.